organizers provided so presciently. Ayla is the president of Our Future, a local nonprofit in Cedar Rapids, and she holds a leadership role in the local chapter of the NAACP Environmental Justice Committee. She also works with the Buffalo Rebellion, a statewide coalition of climate justice advocates. Ayla is busy this spring establishing numerous community gardens. It is my great pleasure to lock arms with this accomplished spinner, weaver, planter, and grower of community initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Ayla Boylen.
I'm not familiar with this mic situation. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Carolyn, and for inviting me here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey with activism and what that's looked like for me and where I have felt most effective in my time. So again, my name is Ayla. I use they or she pronouns interchangeably. I grew up pretty close to here in Yellow River State Forest. My parents are here today. They've been great supporters of me throughout my life. And I spent some time in Decorah growing up. I think it's a very beautiful area, and I continue to come back here and bring friends from Cedar Rapids that maybe don't realize that Iowa can look like this. I went to high school in Monona, so also a very small town. And then I left Monona to go to college in Cedar Rapids. I went to Mount Mercy University, and I was an art major there. I didn't really find my community at Mount Mercy. I was in some ways grateful for that because it forced me to look elsewhere, which is how I found the activism community. I joined Sunrise 4 years ago, and almost immediately was invited to introduce Bernie Sanders in front of 2,000 people in Iowa City. And as someone with a lot of anxiety around public speaking and around life in general, that was a pretty big deal. And it really made me realize that if I could do that, then I should feel a lot more comfortable holding and taking up space in other areas of my life. From there, I met a really amazing community in Cedar Rapids. I found my people. I felt loved and supported. I was able to grow and continue my activism and learn about what felt effective for me and what was really the most gain for the amount of effort. I joined the NAACP Environmental Justice Committee, I think 3 years ago. It may seem strange that someone so young is already talking about their activism journey, but I've been able to do this almost full time. I'm involved with a number of different groups, some of which I added to my bio, some of which I didn't. I've worked for AmeriCorps, I've worked for Linn County Sustainability, I've worked for Feed Iowa First, and just a number of other organizations or nonprofits in Cedar Rapids. So I've seen a lot of different types of activism in my time there, and it's been a journey of burnout and coming back and burning out again and feeling kind of like an energetic martyr for other people when it comes to organizing and leading. So in the past year, I have started a number of community gardens, continued to work on community gardens that I was already involved with, and started what I call a community shared garden, which is a garden that I plant that is accessible to anyone who would like to take produce from it. I also do marshalling training, which is focused on protecting people at protest in a separate entity to policing, something that is more community-based and has less trauma related to it. I personally would call activism just advocating for change in whatever capacity you think that looks like. There's a lot of different types of activism that I've seen throughout my time. When I started with Sunrise, Sunrise is focused on advocating for a Green New Deal at a federal, state, and local level. That can look a little different at all of those levels. We started with more federal focus. We found out that the feds don't really pay attention to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, let alone a Decorah area, and it can feel very much like you're pushing a boulder much too big for you up a hill when you're trying to get the attention of those who are owned by big money and fossil fuel corporations. So from there, we kind of moved to the state level. We also felt like that was a bit of a lost cause, at least for now. And we moved to the state level, and we were actually able to get a climate action plan passed in Cedar Rapids that has now been used as a model for other cities. That was really where I felt powerful for the first time in this movement. I bring a lot of privileges to my activism, involved with my identity and my upbringing and my education, but I also struggled a lot with imposter syndrome, feeling like I wasn't the best person to be talking about these things, that my experiences maybe weren't the most important, or important at all, or special or unique in any way. And I've definitely changed my stance on that. Sometimes I still feel a little out of place, but I continue to try to be a little uncomfortable for the benefit of the planet and the people that I love. So after the city level, we made a lot of progress there, but then we kind of stalled out. We got some new city council members. We worked with Lynn County as well, the county as a whole, and had an action plan passed there as well. And then Sunrise kind of lost traction. We had a lot of kids that were, I say kids, but they're my age, people that were involved in college or in high school that moved on. Folks that also felt burnt out, who spent a lot of time and energy on getting those things passed, and so Sunrise kind of stalled, and I felt a lot of disappointment and guilt in that for our hub stalling out when I was in a leadership position. But I didn't stop, I kept going, I got involved in different places. I became involved with the NAACP Environmental Justice Committee. We started a grant that puts gardens in people's homes. Or backyards for refugee and immigrant families, and then brings them the tools they need to grow the culturally significant foods that they'd like. I really felt, even though it was smaller, it was a garden by garden basis, we install for one family, help one family. The turnaround for that was a little different than something like a climate action plan where you spend years or months developing and relationships and developing the plan. And that also made me feel really good in a different kind of way. It's a different kind of rewarding. I saw a lot of nonprofits that were replicating work because people weren't looking around and trying to build community before they started their own thing. I very much understand the urge to make change, especially at a time where it feels like we're moving backwards, and the urgency that you feel with that. But the thing that I've really found in my organizing that I want to point to today is writing your legislators is great. Direct actions at the state or federal capital are great, can make a huge impact. But really what I've found is the smaller you get, the more community-based you get, the more impact you have for the amount of effort that you're putting in. Especially for somewhere as rural as Iowa, where it can be really hard to get the attention of elected officials at higher levels in the city. What I've found is my community gardens are the place that I feel most effective. Helping people have their basic needs met kind of circumvents the need for some of these things that our state government especially is moving back on. Defunding things like SNAP benefits takes food away from folks, and if people don't have food, they definitely don't have time to go and volunteer and start a nonprofit or drive to the Capitol and protest. So what I've really found is mutual aid sharing is the most effective form of activism, at least for me. And that sounds a little too simple sometimes. When I started this, I did tons of research and tried to learn how to write really amazing speeches and mobilize folks that way. And the thing is most people know what's going on. They're incredibly frustrated and hurt and wounded and angry and all kinds of other emotions that are very valid, but it can feel impossible, or at least that there are many, many barriers to joining a nonprofit, to sitting on a board, to doing direct action or sabotage, and there's all these risks involved with those things. And really what helps other people get involved and what helps us build community and solidarity is having your basic needs met. So it sounds a little simple to me sometimes, but it's really what I've seen. And that's why I'm so happy to be with you all here today, because I see so much community already. The other piece to that has been that my neighbors, the people in my life that I have shown support to, have changed their mind on issues that they were pretty set in stone in because they receive kindness from someone who maybe isn't an identity they're comfortable interacting with. If people have those resources met, not only do we have more resiliency as a community if there's a natural disaster, an unnatural disaster these days, or a reason to be mobilized against an entity. Right now we're having a lot of CO2 pipeline discussions in Cedar Rapids, and if we go door knocking and tell people, it's pretty obvious that this is not a good solution and people are very scared of it, but most of them are afraid of taking time off work, of volunteering because if their face is associated with this, they might lose their job and all of these other things. So if we have the community resiliency, the community support, the mutual aid, the sharing, then we can be a little bit less afraid of falling off of these things that we need to keep us supported. I guess I would talk a little bit about, I know it seems, I have to orient myself here. We talk about time before money or before capitalism. And we often talk about like a bartering economy where it's this double coincidence of needs. I have spears and you have pelts and we're gonna trade them because those are the things that we need. But what actual anthropologists and historians have found is that the time before money was based on gifting culture or like an I'll get the next one sort of mentality. And it's really that, again, going back to the sharing. It's that if you have a little bit of extra money saved away or extra food that's gonna go bad, you give that to your neighbors. If you have a whole bunch of stuff in savings and you're noticing someone online or in your community saying that they can't pay their bills, helping them out. And knowing that in doing that, you build resiliency as a community and that hoping, of course, that they'd help you out too, but also knowing that it's okay if they don't, if they never get their feet back under them, maybe they won't ever have extra to share, but someone will. And in practicing that, I've really seen, in the year that I've had my community garden, I have now convinced, without really talking to anyone, others to do the same thing. They're already putting gardens in their front yard, they're sharing that. I've had people stop at my house that I don't know saying that they can't believe that they never thought of this. So just the practice of it. And I've also had the other side of people saying, I've gone hungry, my kids have gone hungry, and this one little thing is helping us to make sure that we have nutrition in our meals at night. So I guess that's really what I point to, is that it can feel really, really intimidating to get involved in some issues, and because all issues are really interconnected, that you have to get involved in all of these issues at once. And that you have to know everything, and you have to be well researched, and you have to be able to come into a debate or an argument about these things with all the facts. But really what I found is most effective is sharing with others, and they kind of, those that we can bring around kind of come around because of the kindness. And again, that opens things up for them to get more involved in other capacities, so that you're not the only one carrying the torch. If you help other people have their basic needs met, then they can get involved too. So that's really the simple answer that I've found lately in my organizing. I am very open to questions. I know I dumped a whole lot of acronyms on you. And so I could stay up here for a minute and kind of, if you have thoughts or questions, and I know I'll stay for the coffee session afterwards as well.
Jean would say, change is coming whether we want it or not. So, any questions for Ayla?
So if I'm right about this, Sunrise is not just based in Cedar Rapids, but it's like a national organization, youth-led?
Yep.
Right. So just a UU connection to that is that our General Assembly was in Portland, Oregon last year. And every time we have a General Assembly in any community, we try to tap into a local organization that's doing something related to social justice, environmental justice, racial justice, etc. And this last year it was Sunrise in Portland. So we do have that interconnection.
I really love your emphasis on community work. I think that that's something that works, especially, it's probably always worked, but especially it works now when one of the major things we see in our whole society is people not communicating very well with each other. And sharing that kind of love and caring for each other is something you can do without getting into deep political discussions. And if they come in a general way and you're able to share some ideas carefully that way, that can continue along. But I love that I think community work is really addressing one of the problems we have. And the other thing I guess I would add is it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be a both and, because many of us are active in many organizations, but I think the centrality of community is really important, and I'm really glad to see that that's something that you found. That's kind of reinforces some of the things I think that many of us have thought, that community is so valuable, and to see that you're finding that's an effective way to work is great.
Thank you for being here this morning, and thank you to your family for being here as well. I'm curious to know, you mentioned several different times experiencing burnout and rejuvenation, and then burnout again. I'm wondering if you've had an opportunity to reflect on those experiences, and if you're able to identify for us very specifically, if you can, what are the elements that have caused you and perhaps others around you to experience burnout? And I mean, when I say specifically, can you talk about it, very definitively, if at all, rather than just, oh yeah, it's a lot, and it's such a big job and blah blah blah. But are there particular elements that you can identify? These things have caused me personally burnout, or others around me.
Definitely. I guess I would start by saying, obviously I listed a lot of things. I do that really I don't want to come off at all as someone who's like, I'm doing it all. I list them because I've failed in different ways. And I mean that as, not in that those experiences weren't valuable, but that I've learned a lot throughout that. A lot of my burnout came from several things. It would be people were really excited to see a young person, a queer identifying person coming into the movement in Cedar Rapids. A lot of the climate organizers were older white folks that were retired, had expendable income and time, and were able to do that. As you mentioned, Sunrise is meant to be a youth-led movement. It was started by people that were all over 40, and almost everyone in it was over 40, and white and straight and cis and all of those things. And so when I got involved, even though I'm not the most diverse of identities, they were really excited by that. And everyone came to me with a million things that I felt like I had to do, because it's such an important issue. I mean, it's literally life and death for our planet. And so when people would come to me with ideas and opportunities, I struggled a lot at the beginning to set boundaries, to know what was enough. I felt guilty if I did set boundaries and took time for myself, and so that didn't really feel healing or regenerative. Or I would take on everything at once. And that's why I kind of mentioned the term, the energetic martyr thing, which was all of these older folks that had a lot more time, but they wanted to see a young person doing this because it gives them hope. And while I love many of the folks that kind of put me in that position, and I don't think that was at all their intention, it kind of felt like that often, where it was always, if someone reached out, we have a speaking event, we have an article we want to write, we need a speaker for this event, we need someone to plan a protest around this. It would always fall to me because they wanted me to lead. And that kind of goes back then to that feeling of community, is if you feel, even if it's not true, if you feel like you're the only one pulling the wagon, or whatever euphemism you like to use, you can only do that for a short period of time. And so the more you can feel supported, and the more people can supplement you in different ways, I think. That can avoid burnout in many ways. I think the other piece of that, and it's something that I've tried to address in the fellowship program, which I didn't really touch on today because there's a lot of things to talk about, but is the factor that coming into nonprofit or organizing or speaking, I'm an art major. I don't have a political science background. I don't have a public speaking background. I didn't know Robert's rules. I didn't know how to sit on a board. I didn't know how a board operated. And so not only am I trying to grapple with all of these huge societal injustices and issues, I'm just trying to learn how to be in this space and be accepted in this space. And so it felt like I was in many ways trying to address all of these issues, but also learn how to fit into a role that I didn't really know how to be in. And a lot of those spaces were really accommodating for me, and a lot weren't, depending on where I was speaking or what I was doing or who was asking the questions. Sometimes there was lots of room for error and a learning curve, and sometimes it didn't really feel like there was. So I think that the things that then did rejuvenate me, one third piece, actually, I should have taken notes. The third piece would be the idea of like putting in a ton of effort and not seeing a reward. And even though it might be making progress in some way, like passing policy that you don't see implemented for several more years, or even just like planting a tree that you know won't produce fruit for 5 more years, sort of thing. It kind of, you're putting in all this effort and you're not really getting anything back, whether it's physical or warm fuzzy feelings or seeing other people have their needs met. You're not really seeing that, and so that's why the hyper-localism, I think, is one of the things that did rejuvenate me. We got the climate policy passed, and then there was kind of this lull. And then I worked for Feed Iowa First, which was growing organic food and distributing that to people in need. And somehow that made me feel better in many ways, even though it was maybe more of a drop in the bucket. But like seeing a kid hold a carrot and smile and be so happy that you grew it, immediately makes you feel good, where like a climate policy that we aren't really seeing implemented yet 2 years later on the city level kind of just feels like, what was all that for? Fancy paper and like a certificate? So I guess that's the other piece of it too, is that like seeing a reward for the work that you're putting in. And those are kind of the 3 things I think that kind of I've learned along the way in the process of burning out and then feeling re-energized. I've been re-energized by the community and by seeing impact. And I've been burnt out by not seeing impact and not feeling community.
Microphone teaching. Just a quick word. Putting all your energy in and not seeing an immediate result sounds like teaching.
I agree. I think it happens often.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else? I'm happy to talk more too.
I just want to say thank you for being here, and I appreciate your message about community. It's a hopeful message to me. It's hopeful that you're sticking it out in Iowa. You are such a great young person that we're so lucky to have you staying in Iowa and not running away from here. And then just your message is so hopeful to me of that the little things we do can make a difference. And so thank you for being here.
Scott, there's a hand up.
He can ask me later.
For the benefit of everybody.
I'm just kidding.
So this is not to embarrass you at all, but we've had conversation about the fact that that intergenerational hope and how that is also a burden, because I do it to my daughter. So like, I think that we all do that. Our generation and even the generation before us, those of us that care about this stuff, have a tendency to be like, oh, they'll help it, they'll fix it. Because like, I think of my history and I think of the late 80s, I started doing this stuff. I didn't see a lot of change. In fact, I didn't see any, really, very little. But then for me to put that on to my daughter, which I did, and like this is the stuff that I've noticed about a lot of these younger people that I think is phenomenal. They've held us to account for that a little bit and said, hey, I don't think that's right. And my daughters had that conversation with me, which was not totally comfortable at first. Like, it felt a little bit like, what? Like, you know, I tried my best and now you're yelling at me. She wasn't. I will say, she is not yelled at me. But how it feels like that, you know, and I think that as a generation, we tend to do that to our youth, and to put all that responsibility and all that weight of like, hey, you know, well, you better fix climate change because, you know, you're the upcoming, and your children or your children's children or 7 generations or all those things. That is absolutely not fair, and it's incredibly burdensome. So I don't know how you address that, but like, sorry.
I think it's that sharing it. It's that, like, it's been snowballing for so long, passing it off to the next person, saying, I held this back for a while, it's your duty now, even though it's gotten bigger of an issue. It's all of us doing it together rather than passing it off or putting all of the weight on a certain generation.
Since we do have a few more minutes before we need to close, I was wondering if you could say more about specifically our future and the fellowship program so that folks here are aware of what that organization is and what it does.
Yeah, this is our first year. We just officially hired our first 3 fellows. Our future is really a culmination of my experiences and my partner in creating it, Angel Ramirez's experiences, and being involved in nonprofit and organizing, in advocating for equity and justice in Cedar Rapids, and all of the barriers that we faced, even with our individual privileges, to getting involved and being as effective as we can be. So our future is a fellowship program designed on essentially 3 pillars. It's meant to alleviate barriers that young people and people just emerging into this work from diverse identities face to doing it. So we pay a livable wage based on Iowa inflation. We have a huge amount of our time dedicated to professional development, to teaching those skills that I touched on, being very stressed out on earlier, on budgeting, Robert's rules, sitting on a board, imposter syndrome, how the county government works, how the city government works, those sort of pieces. And we have so many professional development, that's only a few, but we pay people to learn those things and to create a project based on their interest that is meant to alleviate some piece of a complex issue in Linn County. So what we're really trying to do is mobilize people who otherwise couldn't get involved, at least now, and make it as easy for them to do what they'd like to and to change the things they want to see changed. We also partner them, second pillar is we partner them with existing nonprofits in Cedar Rapids. They attend those meetings, or Linn County. They attend those meetings, they sit on those boards, they learn about the things that are already happening so that they're better equipped to do their own, and also that they're not replicating that work. And then the last pillar is, the last pillar is that piece that they have their project. So it's the partnerships, the livable wage, and the PD, and then the project. So the project is really designed, in a lot of ways influenced by my time at AmeriCorps, which is wonderful in many ways, but a federal program is a little bit hard to specialize to a community, especially if it's a community that you didn't grow up as a part of. And so a lot of times a project is great during an AmeriCorps term, but then that member leaves, and then that project either ends or becomes a burden on the community that it was established in. And so what we're really trying to do is make sure that these projects are related to a community that the person who is doing them is either a part of or spends a lot of time getting to know, and make sure that there is either a soft close at the end of that project, so it's an educational campaign or something like that, or that they have the structure in place for it to continue on when the program ends at the end of their 8-month term. So we did a little baby pilot program last year with mostly with people that we had some relationship with beforehand, so that as we made mistakes, they gave us grace. This time around, we have all of these extra pieces. It's a complete program, and we've secured funding through Linn County they received ARPA funding, which is COVID relief money. So it's just one-time funding. The hope is that this program is successful enough that we can secure more funding and continue it on in the coming years. But the idea of it is to take a program like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps that has done great things and just make it more local and community-based. So I'm hoping that that can be a model for other groups and all of these nonprofits that are also suffering with burnout and engagement during a time of inflation and a difficult time to volunteer in any capacity. They can kind of start to use this to alleviate barriers and get more people involved so we have more voices and more folks represented in all of these important fights.
I think it's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. So please join me in extinguishing the chalice by reading the text printed in your bulletin. It is our work, shared with each other in covenant, that creates and sustains this beloved community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us, together, in our hearts,